Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, April 15th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Dylan Penningroth, professor of law and history at the University of California, Berkeley, author of Before the Movement, The Hidden History of Black Civil Rights. Also on the program today, Iran launches an anticipated retaliatory restrained strike against Israel. Meanwhile, Europe, U.S. cross their fingers and hope that Israel doesn't decide to exacerbate this moment. Meanwhile, in New York City, Donald Trump in court today for his historic hush money criminal trial. I think it is the first time we've seen a criminal trial for a presidential candidate and former president. I'm number one. Republican House passes a 702 FISA Act reauthorization after a reform amendment fails 212 to 212. Mike Johnson rallies Christian fundamentalists to the Ukrainian cause. Will introduce a Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan aid package in the coming days. The New York Times calls for Israel's aid to be conditioned. New report, homicides plummeting in American cities and burglaries are down 29% since 2019.
Where's that crime wave?
There is a crime wave. It's just that it's the wave is in the big dip.
The George Floyd effect is
In full
weakening.
Haiti sets up a supposedly temporary ruling council following 1 month of negotiations. And Tesla cuts more than 10% of its workforce, not because they're having problems, but because we prefer things lean and mean. Joe Biden closes gap in the latest New York Times poll. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. It is
Fun Day Monday.
Yeah, exactly.
Monday, fun day.
Emma Vigeland nailing it right at the beginning of the week. Good job. Thanks for joining us at the beginning of this week. I guess there was, a couple of moments this weekend where there was real question is like, would we be in a full-on war as of today? I, for one, and we'll talk more about this as the show progresses, but supposedly the Israeli War Cabinet is meeting right now. Supposedly the U.S. has already told Israel stand down. It's unclear whether
They listen?
They listen.
Yeah.
But it appears, and I there are different theories about this. I subscribe to the theory that the talks that the U.S. and Iran were having through intermediaries, perhaps maybe low level directly, in the days following Israel's missile strike in Syria at the Iranian consulate, basically, Iran does not want a war. And there's theories out there that had the UN condemned Israel's actions, that perhaps they would not have felt compelled to launch a counterstrike. But clearly, Iran sent a barrage of missiles and drones and whatnot, all targeted at Israeli military targets, and done so in a way that the U.S. was fully prepared to knock all of these down. Israel and others basically took out most of these missiles and drones and whatnot in a way that suggests this was a little bit of kabuki, that Iran domestically needed to show that they were willing to retaliate, and needed to show that they were willing to launch these weapons. And it's unfortunately there was only one casualty. I don't know, or injury at this point. It's unclear. A 7-year-old Bedouin a girl who lives in a part of Israel where they do not have access to really basically things like bomb shelters and whatnot. And I haven't seen an updated report on her. But for all of those missiles and drones, no injuries.
Yeah. And Iran, for all of their many, many problems, to put it lightly, domestically, in their treatment of women and their suppression of free speech and the regime's many issues on the global stage, they have exercised restraint for quite a while at this point, and clearly are, whether it be Trump's assassination of Soleimani and then their choreographed response to that, and through this, where we don't have any reports of casualties so far, they are the ones that are behaving less belligerently than, say, Israel in this instance.
I mean, I think they know also that if given the excuse, there's a tremendous amount of weapons that would be unleashed upon them.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, you don't have to like Iran's regime or be in any way supportive of it to acknowledge the fact of just plain facts, and that is, they're acting with restraint. It may be out of fear. It may be out of, I would assume that's mostly what it is.
Who cares?
But who cares? They're acting very rationally.
Yeah, you should be afraid to attack civilians in this world, I think, generally.
I mean, it would be nice. It would be nice. Meanwhile, and we'll talk more about that as the program goes on. But meanwhile, I don't know, a mile from here? Mile and a half from where we are, downtown New York, Donald Trump arrived to court in Manhattan, and here he is. He has the distinction, and as you say at the end of senior year in high school, as long as I'm a superlative, it really doesn't matter, right? You want to be one of the, whether and Donald Trump, first presidential candidate, as far as I'm aware of, a major political party, to be on trial for criminal charges in the midst of that campaign, and of course, maybe the first former president to be sitting in a criminal trial. Is that true? I think it is. Here is Donald Trump entering the courtroom this morning.
This is an assault on America. Nothing like this has ever happened before. There's never been anything like it. Every legal scholar says this case is nonsense. It should never have been brought. It doesn't deserve anything like this. There is no case, and they've said it. People that don't necessarily follow or like Donald Trump said this is an outrage that this case was brought. This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America, and that's why I'm very proud to be here. This is an assault on our country, and it's a country that's failing. It's a country that's run by an incompetent man who's very much involved in this case. This is really an attack on a political opponent. That's all it is. So I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much.
Very honored to be here. First off, it's such a strange, like, he almost does this like walk and talk.
I know.
And then, of course, that deep state Chihuahua that they unleash in the courtroom.
Doberman.
Yeah, the dog to, but that's not a Doberman that's barking. It's literally, it's a tiny like lap dog, and making it impossible for him. But he's in, I think he's probably in court right now.
That reverb sounded like a YMCA shower too.
I know. And the way that he comes in front of the camera to announce it like that, it's bizarre and so like funhouse mirrory.
Honored to be here.
But like, yeah, he's so honored. His claim that this is in some way legal scholars are saying it's a total mess and should never have been brought is a bit undercut by the fact that there's already been a federal conviction in this particular case, and that
Somebody's
was Michael
gone to jail.
Cohen.
Right.
Michael Cohen, who will be testifying in this case.
And to be clear, understand again, he's got to sit there the whole time in court. You can't mail it in when you're a criminal defendant, and so this is going to be his next couple of days. I don't know how long the case is going to last, but we shall see.
He'll appeal right away, but the point is just that this is more significant of a case than I thought, right? Just in terms of like the fact that it was related to Stormy Daniels and hush money. On its face, it doesn't look like the more severe one, like the election interference and the documents are probably, they're a little sexier, but no pun intended. But for this, the problem is that he may have there's literally a witness that's going to be able to testify that he made these payments and signed off on it in the Oval Office and things like that. It's more severe than the facts of the case may initially indicate for him.
We shall see, but it'll also be interesting, how it impacts his run. I don't know. I'm of the mind that if he's not in public view, he's sitting in a courtroom, he's benefiting.
Yeah.
But we shall see. A couple of words from our sponsor, and then we will be talking to Dylan Penningroth. He is a professor of law and history at the University of California, Berkeley, author of Before the Movement, The Hidden History of Black Civil Rights. Folks, it's spring. It is spring in New York. It's going to hit 70 degrees today in New York City. I don't know. It's almost like we went past spring and went right to summer. What did we have? Like one day of weather in the 60s and that's it? Nevertheless, it is the time, regardless of what growing zone you're in around the country. It is time for you to go to Fast Growing Trees. Why? Fast Growing Trees is the biggest online nursery in the U.S. with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants and over 2 million happy customers in the U.S. I am one of those customers. I have been one of those customers for years. They got everything you could possibly want. Fruit trees. I bought fruit trees from them. Palm trees. I've never bought a palm tree from them. Evergreens, houseplants, all of that, and so much more. It doesn't matter really what you're interested in. They got it for you. You can find the perfect fit for your climate, find the perfect fit for your space, whether that's indoor or outdoor. Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online. Your plants are shipped directly to your door in 1 to 2 days. And at least in terms of like the fruit trees, and I bought these lilac sort of tree bushes called bloomerangs that bloom twice. They ship them. They're big plants, the kind that you would find at maybe like at a full-on nursery, but you don't have to stick in the back of your car and break half of it off to get it home. And you can get fruit sometimes from these plants the following year. They also have a 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee. They offer free plant consultation forever. So you don't have to have a yard or a lot of space either, because they get a bunch of house plants. And a lot of people don't realize this. You can grow a lemon or an avocado or an olive tree or a fig tree inside your home. Fig trees are actually fantastic. And of course, they got a bunch of other house plants. The experts at Fast Growing Trees curate thousands of plants so you can find the perfect fit. Like I say, your zone, your growing zone, your location, your needs, if you need privacy, you need fruit, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can talk to a plant expert about your soil type, your landscape design, how to take care of your plants, everything else you need. No green thumb required. Check it out. This spring, they have the best deals online, up to half off their selected plants and other deals. And listeners to our show get an additional 15% off their first purchase when using the code MAJORITY at checkout. That's an additional 15% off fastgrowingtrees.com using the code MAJORITY at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com. Code is MAJORITY. Offer valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. Also, here's a great gift to give, really, in some respects, to yourself, but also to your parents, your uncles, your aunts. We're getting close to Mother's Day. This is really a fantastic gift. And when you get up to my age and your folks, you realize your folks aren't going to be around forever, Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories for years to come. I want to thank Storyworth for sponsoring the Majority Report. Storyworth is offering $10 off your first purchase at storyworth.com/majority. And here's how it works. So every week, Storyworth emails, if it's your mom, your dad, you could do both of them. You could do your aunt, your uncle, your grandparents, a thought-provoking question, not like, can you explain, I don't know, what the central banks were doing in the 1930s in the lead up to no, it's not like that. It's fairly banal questions on some level, but they end up being much more thought-provoking than you would imagine. And what was your favorite car ever? What was the first time you went to a movie? Or just whatever it does. All the questions are just to spur a memory. And then they just respond. And they can do it completely out of context. It doesn't matter. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be short. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And you're going to get emailed a copy of whoever you've gifted this to, their response. And you'll see the stories. You can engage with them about the stories or not, up to you. But the beauty is, at the end of the year, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos, if you want, into a beautiful keepsake, hardcover book that you can share, revisit for generations to come. So it's really a gift to you. It's a gift to them. It's a gift to your future kids or nieces or nephews or whatever it is. And you can make a book for them. You can make a book for you. It's fantastic. Families love Storyworth. That's why it has more than 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot, millions of stories preserved since they were founded over 10 years ago. Give all the moms in your life a unique, heartfelt gift that you're going to cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/majority. That's storyworth.com/majority. Save $10 off your first purchase. You can buy one for your cousin to give to their mom, your aunt. I mean, there's just all sorts of different things.
Yep.
But both good for Mother's Day and Father's Day. We will put a link to both those in the podcast and YouTube subscriptions. Descriptions, exactly, and at majority.fm. Also, just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a sustaining member of the Majority Report at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you get the free show free of commercials. You also get the fun half, you get to IM us, and you keep this show successful and operating regardless of ebbs and flows of audience or the news being horrible or depressing or whatever it is. We will be here. So join themajorityreport.com. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Dylan Penningroth, professor of law and history at the University of California, Berkeley, author of Before the Movement, The Hidden History of Black Civil Rights. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome to the program Dylan Penningroth, professor of law and history at the University of California, Berkeley, author of Before the Movement, The Hidden History of Black Civil Rights. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So let's start with, I guess, the genesis of your doing this really, a decade long, more, I think, of research into these documents and essentially recreating the way that recently freedmen and slaves would interact with our society through its legal channels. But let's start with your great aunt and uncle, maybe three greats. I'm not quite sure, which led you to sort of, I guess, begin the interest in this.
Absolutely. So when I was growing up, I used to hear family stories at reunions, cookouts, things like that. And one day I got my hands on a recording of my great uncle, Thomas Holcomb, who was talking about his father, Jackson Holcomb. And one of the stories that he tells on that cassette tape, it's one of these old Memorex tapes, is of when his father gave a boat ride to a bunch of Confederate soldiers in the closing days of the Civil War, about 1865, across a river that they needed to cross. And in the story, he mentions something that's really curious to me, which is that when they got to the other side of the Appomattox River, the soldiers got out and they paid him. And that seemed to be a really strange thing to do, because after all, Jackson Holcomb was a slave, and the soldiers really had no legal reason to pay him. And of course, they had all the guns and every reason to be angry about losing a war over slavery. And yet they paid him apparently without asking any questions. And that really got me thinking about why would white men in 1865 be so, why would they think of paying an enslaved man for services so casually, almost matter-of-factly, almost as if this enslaved man had contract rights? And one of the things that I came to realize over the years is that contract rights are one of the fundamental rights that fall in the category civil rights. And so we can talk more about what civil rights are, but the first thing I just want to sort of lay down is that civil rights in 1865 are not quite the same thing that we mean by civil rights today.
I was even stunned that, both that they're paying a slave and a black man, but I was just stunned that they were paying anybody at that point, to be honest with you. Particularly in retreat, it's not like you're going back the other way. And so I was surprised by that. Just like in a general sense, before we get into specifically like how this set of rights and access to the law was available to a group of people that we wouldn't have anticipated would be available. But what were the, like, why was that so sacrosanct that they were compelled to pay in that instance?
I think it goes to a really fundamental question that is looming back up in front of us very much over the past few years, and that is a question about the rule of law. So, you can think about the rule of law as this kind of abstract thing that hovers over society. You can think that we often assume that it's this very strong, sturdy set of ironclad laws. But in fact, the rule of law is a set of expectations that all of us hold about essentially the way things work in the world. And when the rule of law gets torn and there are no consequences, things can go south in a hurry. So one of the moments when the rule of law often comes close to getting torn is during wartime. And so during the Civil War, you see both on the part of Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers, this, I won't say it's that they're always doing it, but there is this really incredible attention to the rule of law in the following sense. When they take property for use by the army, they give receipts. they keep track of it. And in fact, the Northern Army that leads to a congressional commission that is aimed at compensating loyal Southerners for property that they lost during the Civil War. And I think that's the same set of motivations that leads these Southern soldiers to observe, essentially, it's not that they think Jackson Holcomb has a right to be paid. It's that there is this sense that people have an expectation to be paid for services, including slaves. So this is coming out of a world that I describe in the early chapters of the book, where enslaved people have privileges to earn money and get paid for it. And so the soldiers are essentially recognizing this world, not so much as a set of rights, but a set of expectations that everyone is a part of. And if they tear that set of expectations, things can get really bad for everyone.
Was this a function, because you're going from 1864 to 1970 in this examination of how these rights, how Black people basically experience these rights. But do you think a function of, I guess it reminds me of part of the whole sort of civil rights era was, in part at least, a function of the U.S. competition with the Soviet Union, where there was this pressure where we needed to show, third world countries, non-aligned countries, that we were, providing rights for all our citizens as a way of basically selling ourselves. Was that what was going on? Is that why these type of like personal interactions on some level were upheld, because there was a sense of like half the country, regardless of whether I'm from the Union or the Confederate, is against us, and we need to show that we're a little bit above, that we're better. You're going to be able to prosper, and the only way you're going to be able to do that in the context of this country is if we have some measure of upholding these type of like personal exchanges.
I think the larger question, the larger point that you're making is absolutely correct. Although in 1864, they're not really worried about what other countries are thinking about them so much.
Well, no, I meant within like the competition. I'm using that as an analogy.
Oh, I
U.S.
see.
and in Russia competing with each other, it's bringing out their better angels. And I wonder if that wasn't the case too with the Union and Confederate when they had to have these type of transactions.
I think that might have gone into it a little bit. I think that what mattered more to these folks is that they're thinking of local neighborhood understandings about property. So I'll just take an example that I think all of us can, or many of us can relate to. If you have a home mortgage, that mortgage, it records. It depends on a series of transactions that come down from property owners before you. So when you buy the property, you have to take out title insurance from Chicago Title or something like that. And what they do is they send people to the courthouse to look up the chain of title. And what they want to find is a clean, unbroken chain going from the first owner down to you. If they find a break in the chain of title, then you've got problems, because then the property is at risk of someone else showing up and saying, I actually have the rights to this. It'll be expensive to defend. Someone will have to go to court. That's what title insurance is for. And so it's that set of understandings that I think people are really keenly attuned to. And as I said, these understandings have everything to do with civil rights. So when I talk about civil rights, I'm talking about property, contract, and the right to sue and be sued. Now, Jackson Holcomb didn't have civil rights, but what he had was privileges. He had the privilege to earn money. He had the privilege to make deals, bargains. But in the event, in practice, what he and many other enslaved people found was that these privileges were so widely respected, not always, but they were widely enough respected that you can see that they're following the same logic that rights do, the rights that white people have. And so one of the things that I argue in the book is that in 1865, when Black people become free, and in 1866, when you get America's first Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States have the same right as white persons to own property, make contracts, and sue and be sued, that's actually not a huge break from the slavery period. Like, it's really easy to think that slavery is the absolute opposite of freedom, right? And that, in a sense, is what so much of our politics is built on, this idea that a slave is the absolute opposite of a free person. In some senses, that's right when it comes to political rights or so-called social rights, which we can talk about in a minute. But when it comes to civil rights, the actual practice that white people and Black people in the South experienced in their everyday life, when it comes to things like paying for being ferried across a river, or paying for chickens or eggs, paying for brooms, things that enslaved people make sort of on the margins of society, selling them in the town square. White people are used to dealing with slaves on that basis. They're used to seeing slaves essentially owning things like pigs and exercising rights over chickens and boats and things like that. And so in that sense, 1865-66 is not such a sharp break. And once we start to think of it that way, it starts to give, I think, a different perspective on the conservative Supreme Court majority's views about things like race and rights.
Well, what does it tell? I mean, I want to come back to that question as to what does it tell us about that. But give us a sense of the kind of research that you did do so that people understand what was uncovered here, because I think, looking back, it is hard to have imagined, at least in that era anyways, that there was the opportunity for Black people to access the courts even.
Sure. No, this book took a little while, as you mentioned a bit ago. And part of the reason it took so long is that one of the key types of sources I used was court records from county courthouses. So these are not digitized. They're not online. Most of them are handwritten, and they're out in county courthouses. And so what I would do is I would hop in my rental car and I would drive out to Holly Springs, Mississippi, or Jackson, Mississippi, and I would go downtown to the county square. And I would walk past the big Confederate statue that stands outside of every county courthouse in the South, even today. And I would go inside and I would ask to see old court documents. And so I used two kinds. One was these big cloth-bound, leather-bound ledgers. They weigh about 10 pounds each. And I would take down names of people in lawsuits. And I was looking mostly at civil suits. And once I got the names, I would go back, and my research assistants and I would look up the names in the census to try to figure out which of these names was Black. So here's a funny thing at the beginning. These local court records, surprisingly, do not flag race. They don't say Dylan Penningroth, Negro. Nowhere does it say that on these court documents. And that in itself is a really interesting question. Why not? But in practical terms, what it meant is that we had to take this extra step in order to do this research. We had to figure out which of these cases involved Black people. By the end, we'd collected 14,000 cases. And of those, we found about 1,500 that involved Black people, either as plaintiffs or defendants. And in almost all of those 1,500 cases, there was no clue that the people involved were Black. Then I went back to the courthouse and I looked and I asked for the loose papers. So behind those leather-bound documents, there is often a folder or a set of bound up papers wrapped in red tape, literally red tape. And I would unfold it and I would read the testimony, if there was any. And from that, I begin to piece together a story of how African Americans are engaging with law, thinking about law, talking about law, all the way back to 1872, going forward to the late 1960s.
And so you talk about like the sort of the conception of rights, the civil rights, social rights, political rights under the law, and also you describe that ultimately the way that Black people are engaging with the law at this era and going forward ends up setting up a sort of like, I guess, a pursuit of prescriptive rights on some level. Is that right? And explain what that means.
So prescriptive rights are this broad category of rights in modern law, and they go back a long ways, that essentially say that actions that may not be legal can confer rights over time. So the classic example is your neighbor cuts across your backyard and you don't say anything. If that happens for long enough, and it's set differently in each state, but say 7 years, then your neighbor could actually say that he has rights to cut through your backyard.
There's been an easement created in a sort of de facto way.
You'd have a constructive easement. So these prescriptive rights can ripen over time into legal rights. You can actually turn trespassing into something legal. Now, there are all sorts of rules hedging it in. It doesn't happen very often, but the principle at the bottom of it is the one that I pick up and run with, which is that enslaved people are exercising prerogatives that are not legal rights, but they're so widely recognized and respected that they're part of the same logic that is at work in the doctrine of adverse possession, which is what I just described with cutting through your neighbor's backyard.
So what were those activities? I mean, and we have that in the context of property law, right? Like, squatters or squatting rights. And that's why, people are making a big deal of it now, but this is something that has existed in law, I think, even, prior to, this was English common law, I think it was, that sort of established this concept of squatting rights, just broadly speaking. But what were those things, those actions that were being taken care of? Was it simply exercising their sort of contractual and almost, I don't know what you would call that, commercial rights that ended up sort of expanding on some level?
Well, I think what I can say is that enslaved people's, when they're acquiring chickens, when they're growing vegetables in their back gardens, we're seeing them engage in economic activities. And there's two things that I think are key takeaways from that. One is that the masters are essentially shifting the costs of sustaining the slaves, like part of the cost of doing business, onto the slaves. So you always have to remember that a plantation is a profit-making business. Southerners like to describe it as, moonlight and magnolias. We're all one big happy family. But these are essentially capitalist enterprises. They're trying to make money. And one of the ways that masters made money was by cutting down on their operating costs. And they did that often by shifting the costs of feeding and clothing the slaves onto the slaves themselves. So the slaves, they have the quote unquote privilege of working for themselves after hours. Now keep in mind that after hours is after sundown. So they've been working from sun up to sundown. And then they have the privilege of doing things like keeping pigs and chickens and selling them. And with the proceeds from those earnings, they feed themselves things that the master doesn't provide. So that means that the master can now give, 6 pounds of fat pork and, a bunch of cornmeal, which on its own would be starvation. There's not enough nutrients in all that. But the master can do that because he knows that the enslaved people are going to get their vegetables through their own efforts. And so there are a lot of ways that this takes place. Elder care, masters shift the burdens of old age onto enslaved people. Medical care, same thing. And it's all done by exploiting this system of prescriptive rights that the slaves participate in. And again, this is sort of this larger set of understandings that helps explain why the soldiers paid Jackson Holcomb after he took them across the river. It's part of this same set of understandings. And if they didn't pay him, of course, they had the power not to pay him. They had the right not to pay him. But if they hadn't, they would have had to sort of upset that mental universe in which it is normal and expected to pay even an enslaved person for services performed.
How conscious were people at that time, do you think, of like, this is, I mean, on some level, you're talking about like social reproduction and so that the slaves could be available to work, you know, increasingly for even less than free, right? At that point. How conscious was everybody in the South that this is, you know, when we pay this slave for ferrying us over, we are in some fashion supporting our broader system. Like this, like if we were to deny them, it would ultimately end up like undermining the plantation system.
It's hard to say how conscious ordinary people were. I think that things like this largely sort of, they go unconsciously.
Just become custom.
Custom. It's part of the water that you swim in. But there are moments when people kind of snap to attention. And those moments tend to be when a group of white people who feel aggrieved by the privileges that slaves have, they agitate in the state legislature to get a law passed. They essentially say things like, well, you know, we're mechanics, we're taxi drivers, and we are aggrieved, and we think there ought to be a law. There ought to be a law against enslaved people working as mechanics or as taxi drivers. And so they get a law passed, and then it goes up to the court, the state Supreme Court, and the court once in a while will articulate openly that logic that we've been talking about. You know, and the court will say things like, well, everybody knows that in spite of the law saying that slaves can't do X, Y, and Z, everybody knows that slaves do it anyway. And everybody knows that this is part of the system, part of the set of understandings that makes our system work.
Interesting. And so then we have this, I mean, that dynamic, I would imagine, keeps playing out over and over again, because on one hand, you got to give slaves and even freedmen at that point who are going to come back and work on these farms in many respects through Reconstruction, the ability to support working at such low wages. I mean, we see that in the context of, Walmart relying on the government to provide Medicare on some level. This is some iteration of that. But then the rights or customs that are afforded to these freed black men they start to actually accrue wealth in some instances. I mean, you write about going from 1870 to 1910, home ownership goes from 43,000 to 500,000 over that time. You've got a similar sort of like other measures of property ownership. You talk about your great uncle and aunt, amassing a little bit of a tiny fortune, I guess, relatively speaking. And then, of course, we get this huge societal blowback in the form of a reemerged KKK in the 1910s and so on. But how does that play out legally? I mean, they go and they pass these laws. I would imagine that's where some like licensing laws came from and other things like that to exclude, to both allow, on one hand, you want to allow a certain amount of commerce in that, but then you also don't want them to like make that much money, assuming you're these people.
No, it's absolutely true. One of the fascinating things about this story is that the racial violence, the lynching that you mentioned, the KKK, it's actually, it is growing and peaking at the same time as this rise in Black wealth. So the high point of Black land ownership, 15 million acres around sometime between 1910 and 1920. That is around the same time as the peak of lynching in the United States, the greatest number of Black people lynched. So these are actually happening at the same time.
Non-coincidentally, right? I mean, that's what the Tulsa massacre was about. I mean, that's what all of these massacres that happen towards the end of Reconstruction is. This is blowback essentially from I think what Carol Anderson wrote, like white rage, 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of situation.
It is blowback, and at the same time, the blowback does not succeed, and I think is not designed to succeed in driving Black people into utter poverty. You know, they never stamp out this Black middle class, and I think there are a lot of different reasons for that. But I think that one reason is that they don't need to. There are plenty of ways for wealthy white people to stay on top of the South's economic system other than eradicating a Black middle class. But another reason is that the rules of property and contract, they don't formally take race into account. So that chain of title that we were talking about earlier, nowhere in the chain of title does it typically say that this person was a Negro. And that's because property law doesn't have separate categories for white and Black people. It's just property law. And there are reasons for that within property law. You know, essentially it comes down to property law is really conservative. It's hard to change. But another reason it's just really inefficient. Where would you put a ledger? Where would you put a transaction from a white person to a Black person? Should that go in the colored property or the white property? It just becomes administratively a nightmare. So there are all sorts of reasons why white people don't completely deprive Black people of their property and their contract rights. But one of the biggest ones, I think, goes back to this, the same dynamic that we saw during slavery, which is that you don't need it. You don't need to deprive Black people completely of property in order for the system to work. And by the system, I mean a system that keeps most white people, along with most Black people, quite poor, and a small cadre of wealthy white people at the top. The system functions during freedom as well as in slavery. So I'll just give you a quick example that comes again from a different side of my family, which is in 1866, I found a contract dated 1866. I think it was June 30th, 1866, where a white man named William R. Baskerville signs a contract with, I guess, 30 or so Negroes formerly his slaves, right? So these are people who used to be his slaves. And one of the things that the contract says is each of these and formerly enslaved people is going to get a certain amount of corn at the end of the year. And they're going to perform certain jobs, but it doesn't go into great detail. The contract doesn't say much about what those jobs are. Instead, it says that they will perform the work as they have heretofore done while they were slaves. So there's this contract that's literally saying that these people are going to work like slaves, but because they're getting this contract, they are by definition, and by modern definitions that even John Roberts would understand, they are free because they have the right to make this contract, because they are going to be paid for services rendered. So the system functions to keep men like William R. Baskerville on top, and people like Rosa Baskerville, who I think is another one of my ancestors, although I can't trace it exactly. It serves to keep people like her poor. And it's done not in defiance of the law. This is not an instance where William R. Baskerville is running around with guns and whips and terrorizing Black people. It's working through the law. She's signing because she doesn't have any better options. She can either sign this contract or she can starve. And so this is the dynamic that keeps most Black people, and most white people for that matter, on the bottom economically. And it serves very well, even without violence, to keep the white elite on top.
So how does it ultimately mutate or grow into this? So this system of contract law is maintained because it services essentially the capitalist and the sort of slave economy, as it were. And it's easier to do. It makes it simpler administratively. If you want to keep Black people, if you want to put them in a different class when it comes to buying property, you do it before the transaction in some fashion. We redline, we say you can't buy here or whatever it is, but the transaction itself still maintains some type of like legal integrity, I guess. But how does using this system, and a lot of times, I think you're right that most of the times that Black people went to court, it was in regards to a transaction with other Black people for the most part. But how does exercising and sort of like invigorating this element of the law spread to the development of what we now call civil rights law and political rights, I guess?
That's a great question. So I think we have to go back to Abraham Lincoln's election. When he's campaigning for president, he articulates a vision of freedom that white Northerners are willing to sign on to in large enough numbers to make him president. And it goes like this, that there are three kinds of rights, three kinds of equality in America: political, social, and civil. Political rights mean the right to be elected to office, the right to vote, things like that, to serve on juries. Social rights are this grab bag of everything else, but it typically means the right to sit next to someone in a movie theater, or to sit in a restaurant, or, and this is the most electric part of the campaign rhetoric, to marry someone. That's a social right. And so Lincoln says political rights are off the table for Black people. Social rights are definitely off the table. And he gets big laugh lines from audiences in Illinois during the Stephen Douglas debates for US Senate. He gets big laugh lines when he cracks jokes about, well, I don't want to sleep with a Black woman, and neither does anyone else in my party. And so those are off the table. But civil rights, that is, and this is how he puts it, the right to eat the bread which his own hand has earned by the sweat of his brow, the Negro is the equal of any white man in America. So Lincoln and the Republican Party come into the Freedom era with this vision of what you might call fundamental rights: property, contract, the right to sue and be sued. That's what goes in the Civil Rights Act of 1866. That's a winning formula, a winning ticket for Republicans throughout the late 19th century. And it quickly gets turned into something that we're still living with today, which is this libertarian idea of civil rights, which is that that's all you need in order to be free. African Americans and their white allies consistently say, even before Lincoln is campaigning on this message, that yes, you need these fundamental rights, these libertarian rights, but you also need political rights, and you need equality in the sphere of the so-called social. It is a badge of slavery, they say, to force Black people to sit in a different section of a movie theater. It puts a mark on them that stigmatizes them and marks them as the descendants of slaves, humiliates them, subordinates them. And they say this consistently. And so that argument is something that activists begin in the 30s and 40s, and they carry it through all the way through the civil rights marches of the 1960s. And the message is pretty simple. We need not just citizenship and equal rights in the realm of the civil, we need full citizenship. And until we have full citizenship, we are still, in some deep sense, enslaved.
And was it also the case that that those civil rights were, as they're exercised more, you begin to understand that they're also undermined if you don't have that sort of social and political, right? Because the political is ultimately determining what the nature of those civil rights are going to be. And if you're consistently dispossessed by them, whether it's, tax law that favors white wealthy people because they had the political power, or the fact that I can't eat in that restaurant, I can't travel to this town because I can't go to that hotel, that means I can't engage in the commerce that might be necessary if I'm a traveling salesman or something.
Absolutely. The connections are always there in some of the ways that you describe, and even more. So it is absolutely the case that activists argue that voting rights are essential to maintaining and protecting civil rights. And you can see that in the voting patterns that happen after Black people first get the right to vote in places like Mississippi. So the activists from SNCC, they go out, and their argument to people in Mississippi in 1964, 65, 66, their argument isn't vote for Lyndon Johnson to be president. Their argument is vote for the county tax assessor, vote these county supervisors out, because those are the guys who are maintaining this cabal of oligarchs at the county courthouse. These are the guys who determine whose land gets flooded, when the rains come. These are the guys who determine whose church is tax exempt, right? You need to go out and vote in order to throw out that old guard and elect a new guard who are going to redo the tax assessments. And so there's this fascinating story that happens there. And it goes to your point that these rights are interconnected. I'll give you another example. You've probably heard the case New York Times versus Sullivan, which is about press freedom. Mm-hmm. And there are at least 2 Supreme Court justices who want to overturn New York Times versus Sullivan. We'll see whether they can get others to sign on. But one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough in that case is that, it's a libel suit that Alabama officials file against a bunch of Black ministers and activists for an advertisement that they took out. And they win damages against these ministers. And they take the damages essentially by seizing the ministers' land and automobiles. So it's this incredible attack on Black people's civil rights, that is in the old-fashioned Abraham Lincoln sense, in order to attack this modern effort, this effort to achieve civil rights in the modern sense, that is anti-discrimination, equal and first-class citizenship in all realms of life.
And lastly, I guess, how does the civil rights of Lincoln's era, that being sort of like the transactional, operational rights of commerce and whatnot, ultimately become defined to include political and social rights by the time we get to, I don't know, the 1960s? Is it both a function of like a push from one direction and a pull from the other, or how does that change? How does that language change, and does it change under the law as well, or is that always been more of like a more vernacular question?
It's a long, slow process, and one of the interesting things is that, when you're looking at these cases in county courthouses, nobody ever really says civil rights. What they do is they go and they say, well, my neighbor's fence is, encroaching on my land, or that person's cow got into my land. They don't say I'm pursuing a civil rights case, even though that is essentially what they're doing. But what you see especially beginning in the 1940s, is this increasing rhetorical turn toward equating civil rights with Negro rights. So there's this Life magazine cover in 1947 that my friend Chris Schmidt went back to and uncovered, where, it essentially says that civil rights means Negro rights. And as civil rights becomes more identified with Blackness and Black equality, it becomes more identified with this anti-discrimination, anti-subordination principle. Now, that had always been there since the 1866 Civil Rights Act, because you remember it said, shall enjoy the same rights as are enjoyed by white citizens. So it's always been there all along. But by the 1940s, that same logic is being used to revive this older logic of anti-discrimination in property and contract, and to extend it into the world of the social and the political. And in a sense, that's kind of what the civil rights struggle is all about in the 1950s and 60s. But what's fascinating is that Black people keep exercising those old-fashioned civil rights. And of course, we still are today, right? We own houses, we're making contracts, we're running businesses and churches, all of which are dealing with contract and property 24/7. But the rhetoric of civil rights increasingly implies that those activities, that those ideas about property and contract, it implies that those are not civil rights, that there's something else. They're in a different category. You can even see it in law schools. Law schools teach this important curriculum in the first year, and it consists of a bunch of courses, and the headliners are property, contract, and tort, and civil procedure, and criminal procedure. Those are the courses that students learn in their first year. And then, if you want, in the third year, you can take an elective called civil rights. So there's this implication that the two are distinct. The 19th century sense that civil rights are property and contract, I think, has been lost even in law schools.
It's fascinating. Dylan Penningroth, professor of law and history at the University of California, Berkeley. The book is Before the Movement, The Hidden History of Black Civil Rights. Thanks so much for your time today. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm and in the podcast and YouTube description. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, folks. That ends the free portion of our program. We will now head into the fun half with a couple of reminders. Ladies and gentlemen, it is April. And that means it is the fourth month. And it's April 15th. We are just 5 days away from 420. And that means not only are our buddies at sunsetlakesabade.com getting in on that, but Cedar Seeds right now. This is crazy. If you use the code April up until the 21st of April, you can get 42% off.
Whoa.
Anything on the entire site, which is all seeds. So any type of seeds. So now it's 42% off.
That's a lot.
It's a lot off. I am actually got my seedlings going right now.
Very fun.
Yes, it is fun. They're on my windowsill. And I'm just praying that my cats don't tip them over. That's basically it.
So remember to sex them this year?
No, because I'm just growing for seeds.
What about for your staff?
My staff.
Right.
Well, if you guys got a fire escape, instead of like pulling, I
do not.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll try and do it. But
I can dream.
cedarseeds.com. cedarseeds.com. Check it out. Use the coupon code April, get 42% off. Also, don't forget AM Quickie. Jacob and Corey are burning it up right now. A lot of news out there. Great way to stay on top of it. amquickie.com. And as always, the majority Discord, over 10,000 people in our Discord. If you have any question about anything really at this point, literally anything, you will find an answer in that Discord. And we still have our Majority Report 20th anniversary merch. Going to have it all year, so check it out. shop.majorityreportradio.com. Emma!
ESPN, big show today where we recap a really exciting finish in the NBA to head into the play-in, as well as a really exciting finish at the end of the NHL playoffs. Like this final wild card spot is still not determined in the NHL, and seeding as well. We'll also talk about the Coyotes moving to Utah, and then Aaron Rodgers said a bunch of dumb other crap on a podcast. So
He's going increasingly insane, I think.
Yeah, he has like RFK, his idol, he has a hero complex that is extremely misplaced, and he says he's not political, but then he says a bunch of right-wing stuff, including his theory that Hillary Clinton may have been involved in the plane crash that killed JFK Jr. So youtube.com/ESPN show today.
It's tough to be political and not know you're political. Like, I'm political, but
Right.
I'm fine with that.
Right, exactly. But that's like a lot of these kind of, I mean, it's the Roganite type where I'm like, I'm not political, but I believe all these right-wing things and these conspiracies.
But what's up with these migrants?
Exactly.
People being lazy.
So youtube.com/ESPN show.
Ryan and Callie says, can we get apple seeds from Cedar Seeds? If so, can I get an order of some Red Delicious? First of all,
You would never do such a thing.
well, that's not the way apples work. If you take a Red Delicious apple and you slice it in half, you pull out those seeds and you go plant it, you have no idea what kind of apple you're going to get. None. The way any apple trees exist is by grafting. That's how all of, like, we got 4,000 species. We got more than 4,000 species, 4,000 plus that are actually named. It's not from seeds. It's all from grafting. It's all from a tree that you graft onto another tree. Do you guys even know what I'm talking about? You're all looking at me like I'm insane.
No. I grew up in suburban New Jersey.
Do you know what
and I live in the
grafting
city.
onto a tree means?
No.
Like you literally, you take, like, if you see a tree, if you come across an apple in the world that you like, you can't take that apple and take the seeds and plant it. You will not get the same apple.
What will you get?
Some other weird apple. Maybe they'll be edible, maybe they won't. I mean, you're not going to die, but it may not be tasty. So what you do is you cut off a branch and you essentially just like tape it, you carve a little bit into another tree and you tape it on there and it just grows. And then you keep doing it. If you go and you have an Arkansas black tree, that came from a specific Arkansas black tree in the past.
How did apples even start on this planet, though?
Well, apples were just here. And
What came first, the apple or the graft?
Well, the apple did.
Okay.
It's just that they mutate over time and then just like this one's like, oh, this one's horrible. I'm just going to use it for cider. Oh, this one's actually good. I'm going to eat it.
Well, I go to my Bible for all my apple-related facts, so...
All right, Matt, go ahead. I've blown everybody's mind.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to stay with me.
You learn something new every day.
Anthony Fantano of the Needle Drop. I talked to him for about 45 minutes. You can check out the first part of it we released on the last public show on Tuesday. We're talking to him about the Drake Kendrick Lamar beef, which is updated over the weekend. But also we talk about Rick Rubin retweeting Mike Cernovich and Anthony's opinions about politics or the economics of streaming generally right now, which is not good.
Did Drake respond?
He did, yeah.
What's your assessment of it?
I've only taken it through once. I don't think it's as strong as Kendrick's, obviously, but I think it's good to keep the ball in the air, and I think Kendrick's probably going to destroy him.
I saw people were comparing Drake now to like Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs last year, where everyone wrote him off, and now you got to root for him, or like Steph Curry and the Warriors when they find.
Now you got to root for him and his ghostwriters.
And I just find that to be that's not my read on this. This is somebody who's a little bit out of his depth. He's more of a pop artist, and that's fine. He doesn't need to be like a tough rapper to make a lot of. He's already made a ton of money. Why does he care?
Yeah, well, Kendrick cares that he calls himself the big three, and I agree with Kendrick.
Well, I agree. Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
All right.
It's like grafting apples.
See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males...
Psych. Fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland, the fun half of the Majority Report. Just got a message from